quilt block pattern and create something new and exciting and so different from the original look? Hi, I'm Lea Louise from Inspired Quilting by Lea Louise, and I'm really excited to show you this quilt today. It's a disappearing 9-patch, but it's set up just a little differently than what we're used to. So by taking our blocks and changing them around just a little bit, we can come up with a totally different layout. And then creating a monochromatic look with just a little bit of tonal balance and difference between the squares. It looks wonderful. This is an elegant wedding quilt. And the bride-to-be is going to be so excited. And I want to share this with you. Now, this is only part of the quilt. I'm going to show you how to make this so you can make your own. Let's get started right now. The disappearing 9-patch has been around for a while, and this block is very, very common. There are some standard, traditional, common ways to do it, and it's fun to find something that's a little bit different in not only the way that the individual quadrants are turned after we cut them, but how a block placement, a color placement in a single block can make such a difference. Now, the quilt I'm making today, it's a wedding quilt, and it's intended to be all low volume. It's pretty much monochromatic, whites and light creams, but the pattern that I'm using looks best when you have a contrasting fabric in the center. Now, while this is not a strong contrast, it is going to give me the effect that I want. I have a couple different, let's see, where are they? A couple different colors in the middle that will be spread out across the quilt to give me that effect. And for that reason, I want to show it to you in a stronger contrast so you can see what this pattern is going to look like. It's going to be beautiful and create a really elegant look on this particular quilt. And you can also use it to make this really bright, vibrant quilt with pops of color. And the difference with this is how we arrange the quadrants after they're cut. So just like any traditional 9-patch, we're going to sew our rows together. These get pressed in, these seams get pressed out, and then we're going to do our two together. So I'm going to go ahead and make this block up. I just wanted you to see these are 5-inch squares. So I'm using some leftover charms that I had. You can use charm packs, you can use fat quarters, cut them down to 5-inch squares. I have a video on how to do that if you're interested, because I'm a fat quarter collector and I love them, and I like to use them because it gives me more variety to work with, and then I can cut the charms as I need them. But for this particular pattern, it's 5-inch squares with some real serious contrast in the middle. So let me go ahead and get this block made up. We'll cut it and I'll show you how this is going to work. And here's our finished 9-patch all sewn together. And what I did is I sewed this row, and this row. And you can see that the center row with the bright contrast square, those seams are pressed inward. And the outer rows, these seams are pressed to the outside. We don't really pay attention to light and dark in this because it's more about how the blocks are going to lay when it's cut. And if we follow the light and dark rule, pressing to the dark, then we may have some problems and it won't line up easily. Won't be able to nest your seams. So this is all done when I do multiples like this. This is all done chain stitching. And once I get the chain stitching done, I go through, I give them a press, and then what I'm going to do is cut them. Now, we have 3 5-inch squares, which measure 15 inches, and we've got 2 1/4-inch seam allowances here, and 2 more here, so that's a total of 1 inch. So this now measures 14 inches. Now, what's really important is that this square is right in the center, and when you cut, that you are cutting through the center of that contrast square. Now you'll notice on here, I don't know whether it was the way I cut or the way I sewed, but I'm a little scant on these side seams. But as long as I cut here nice and straight, that's going to work out okay. So if I measure, let's go from here to here. Do it with the right side up. If I measure from here, you can see that these blocks are 4.5 inches. So I'm going to come in at 2 1/4. So there's my 2-inch line. I'm going to bring it out to 2 1/4, and I'm going to put it right on that seam. So right here I'm lining up 2 1/4. And if you look over here, this also is lined up at 2 1/4. So that tells me I'm going right down the center. And I'm going to pull this. That fabric wants to bow a little bit. All right, so we're going to go down the center here. And we're going to do the same thing in the other direction. So we're going to hit the 2 1/4 mark on these two spots, here and here. And again, if we double check, we're right there, just shy of 2 1/4. So I'm going to bring this in just a tad. And then we're going to cut this way. So now we have a 9 patch that has been cut into a 4 patch. And this is what they look like. Now traditionally, what you would do is turn these two, and you get this really fun pattern, and it looks wonderful, and you kind of get this diagonal. And it depends on the colors you use and how they're placed, and you can get different looks with your quilt. Now this creates a secondary pattern right here. See how these are coming together? And so in the next set of blocks, this is what it's going to look like. So you alternate between these diagonals, which are going in various directions, with the plus or the cross in between. So that's a lot of fun. But what I want to show you is a different way of doing it. And it's funny, sometimes I have a hard time remembering which way to turn things. But all I can think of when I do this block is square dancing. Back in the day when we were taught how to square dance in school, not that I ever learned it well, but I always thought it was cool, and the music and step here and go there. So I kind of step myself through this that way. So this block remains it's in its position. This block takes 1 turn right, 2 turns right, if I can get it in there, and 3 turns right. 1, 2, and 3. Now, what this does, and this is, I wanted to do it with these fabrics so you could see how these lay. What this does is creates this wonderful additional pattern throughout your quilt with these bright, bold colors just sort of splashed across, especially if you go with more of a low value. Or if you want to highlight a particular color, you have a quilt full of color and you want to highlight one in particular, maybe it's the brighter and you really want to have that one stand out, this is a great pattern for that as well. So I just wanted you to see, let me do it again, how we get to this point, because I just think it turns out beautiful and I can't wait to show it to you on this. But in order for you to see it here, I wanted you to see it with this contrast because it's not going to be quite as evident. So we turn right once, turn right twice, and 3 times, 2 and 3. And so we have this kind of wash happening here. And you see what's going to happen now is that this is going to come up here. See how these larger squares are going to have the bright contrast next to them, and then these kind of sashing bars, whatever we want to call them, dividers, just sort of kind of recede into the background and let these guys just stand out and do all the work and make a creative design that's really wonderful. So let me go ahead and get some of these cut up, and I'm going to show you how they'll look in this layout. So I have these blocks. I had 4 9 patches that I put together, and I have all of them cut into the 4 pieces, into the 4 patch or 4 quadrants, and the centers are all in the middle. What I want to show you though is that this was all the same, and I wanted to have one of these be different in the middle. I predominantly have this block throughout all my 9 patches, but there are a couple other of the darker prints that I had that I sort of put in sporadically. And I just want them to sort of be distributed throughout the quilt. So if you are using the same color, not to worry. If you're using a lot of different colors, not to worry. But because most of my blocks had this, and a few of them had this, I didn't want to have one of these finished blocks with all one color and everything else have this color. So I want these mixed in throughout the quilt. So I went ahead and cut these, and this is also a good time if you want to make sure that all these aren't the same. So for example, oh, see, I have 2 stars here. So I can pull this one out and just swap it out here. And now I have 2 and 2. And I probably think everything else looks good. And so now we're going to do our little square dance. And so everything is in the center. I've cut, and like I said, we pressed it with the seams going in opposite directions so that we're going to be able to get everything put together really nicely at the end. So the first thing we do, this block, we turn right once. This block steps right twice. And then we have 3 steps right here. And so you can see, even though these don't have the real dark contrast, like our purple color there, it is going to stand out in the overall pattern of the quilt. And that's what I want to show you. It's just kind of a fun way to create a little more interest in a monochromatic quilt. I love monochromatic, especially when it's done with the low volumes. I just think they're beautiful and delicate looking, and they have an elegant look about them. And so for me, in order to dress it up a little bit and change the pattern so that it's more interesting to look at, because if you just have one block after the other of the same sort of monotone fabrics going on, it can get a little boring. So this changes it up really nice. It adds some great design. So what I want to do is go ahead and put these 4 blocks together, and then I'm going to sew them into one, because what's nice about using a disappearing 9 patch is we're going to sew this into a single block, and now we have these really large 14, I think it ends up to be 13.5-inch blocks to sew our quilt together. So it goes really, really fast. So let me go ahead and get this one sewn together. I'll get these all pieced and sewn together, and we'll put them all on the table so you can see what they look like as they're laid out in this particular design, and just watch how these little darker blocks stand out and make a really nice pattern to look at. So let me get that done. I'll be right back. And this is the part I'm excited to show you. Do you see how these darker, smaller squares create this really nice kind of flowing diagonal line? It's a great design element amongst all these larger blocks. It just sets them off a little. It creates a little bit of interest. And to some degree, these are sort of like the falling charms, I think is what they're called, where they're sort of coming down at an angle, and in this case they're here. I just think it's a fun pattern, and I love how this lays out. Now, as far as pressing, I do want to show you. Notice that as I laid these blocks out, every one of them, some dust here, every one of them has this block right here, top and center. And that way they're all going to lay out in the exact same pattern so that you continue with the diagonal. Now with that in mind, we want to press these so that as we sew it together, our blocks are going to go together more easily. What works well on this center seam is to have them going in opposing directions like this. And what I do is I sew the top seam towards that dark center and this away. Now, when you sew this center seam, it's going to fold according to how you put your quilt together. When I put these two together, one I want to go up, one I want to go down. So I don't press these too much. I just give it a quick touch just to sort of set the stitches in there. And then once I put this together and get those nested, then I'll give it a good final press. It'll get everything down. But I can get these seams done ahead of time. And then when these match up, see, this goes this way, but this one comes this way. So when I put this block here, this seam allowance is there, you can see it, and this seam allowance is here, so they fit great, and they're going to nest really nice. These are the ones that you just have to be a little fussy with, and just as you're sewing along, you know, just alternate every other one, and it's going to go together easy, and that's not a problem. It's just remembering it to do that way. And that's your choice. Some folks prefer to press them open, but with me, nesting seams, I think just gives a really good finished look, and that's my preference. So let me get this finished. I want to show you what it looks like on a larger scale with all these blocks together. I think I've covered everything I wanted to share with you. It's just really important to see how these lay out and keep these blocks in the consistent order so they're all in the same direction, and you're going to have a beautiful design. So let me show you what this looks like finished. Even though I worked with all the same color, basically white and cream, tone on tone, a little bit of gray here and there, this looks like a really dynamic pattern. I mean, I love all the contrast. I love that you can see so much going on and how these stand out so much more than you would expect. I was afraid this was just going to be a big white quilt, but my goodness, look how wonderful it turned out. I'm really excited about this. Now, this is at a 9x9. So these are my, right here, you can see, this is my 4 patch. This is my disappearing 9 patch that I cut into quadrants and made into a 4 patch right here. And if I turn it this way, this will look more familiar because this is the way we set up the block. Remember, we had 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is our 4 square, our little square dance block. And they look great, but here's what I wanted to show you. Remember I talked to you about how these little blocks are going to stand out and look wonderful? So what I really love about this is, do you see how with these 5-inch, see how these we create almost the tumbling charms? That's a very popular quilt that's out there. Yet at the same time, we have these smaller 2-inch squares that sort of follow in sequence. And so we have this really nice diagonal that kind of follows each other here. Now this way it's an opposite, large, small, large, small. So when you are putting this quilt together and thinking about different colors and different designs that you want in your quilt top, think about where the color placement will be. Do you want the background to be muted and have these waves of color more on like I say, a background look, and then make these your bright, bold colors because they make such a strong design pattern? Or the opposite, make these be your more low volume background, and then these be your strong. So this is a pattern that has so many opportunities to create some fun color and fabric design. And while this right here I'm showing you is the baby quilt size, this is not going to be the finished baby quilt. This will become the wedding quilt. I actually made 36 9 patches out of these fabrics. And we're talking probably somewhere in the vicinity of 7 yards. So for me, I count by fat quarters, and it was 27 fat quarters is about what I had. And it's going to be beautiful. I think it's going to be somewhere between 75 to 80 inches when it's finished. And I love this. I love how it turned out. I'm really excited. There will be a pattern for this, but I need to do it in a few more colorways because I want you all to see just what we can do with this block. I love a simple block that goes together easily, that really creates some wonderful, wonderful design opportunities to play with fabrics, whether, well, it's like this one here. You know, we can do some batiks and we still maintain this lighter background, and we go a little bit darker on this diagonal. So where are we here? Let me show you in the quilt. You know, we have these bright diagonals working. We have our falling charms in here, and it all just works really well. And there's some really fun layouts we can do with this. So that's what I'm going to be working on. I'll get this quilt finished, and when it's finished, I'll have a couple others to show you, and I'll do another video with more of the design opportunities and different aspects we can look at. So in the meantime, I hope you love this quilt. If you're going to make a disappearing 9 patch, think about this particular layout, give it a try, and see what works for you. It's a great, great, wonderful block layout that I think you'll have a lot of fun with. Let's see what we can do here and see how it looks. Look at that. Isn't that pretty? I love all these colors. I'd say colors, all these shades. Colors isn't quite the right word, is it? But it looks wonderful, and I think our bride-to-be is going to be very, very happy with this quilt. I hope you try this and take the opportunity to use lots of bright colors, or not, or do something like this and go monochromatic. Whatever you do, it's going to be a fun finish, and you will enjoy making this quilt. It really is not a difficult challenge at all. So have a great day. Enjoy. It's been a pleasure having you here with me. And please, thank you in advance for subscribing to my channel. It's been my pleasure to have you. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.